government's between a rock and a hard place, to be honest with you. There's really no kind of end in sight.
The government has activated emergency measures to ease prison overcrowding. The pressure is growing with more rioters going through the courts for their role in recent disorder. While defendants wait for a court appearance, they're going to be kept in police cells until prison space is available. Well, Mark Ike is the Vice President of the Prison Governors Association. Mark, have you guys been informed by the government what these emergency measures are going to mean for you?
Yeah, good morning. Not necessarily informed, but we are aware of what this actually means. This is not the first time we've been here. I think most recently was in May. And so we're pretty well versed on what early dawn means for us.
Yeah, and in terms of how prepared prisons are for a large influx of people all coming through at one time, i.e., the government says there's 470 people have already been charged, and for the riots. I mean, that's a pretty big spike to put on top of the ordinary number of people that are going through the courts, isn't it?
Well, I think because the prison population has been running so high for so long, in excess of 88,000, we're pretty decent at working with large numbers of prisoners coming in and out of our reception. So our reception prisons, sometimes referred to as local prisons, it wouldn't be unusual to sort of do 100 moves a day through those types of reception prisons. But of course, what's happened at the moment is that where the spaces are so limited, it's putting increased pressure, not just on the governors of those prisons, but the entire staffing group and actually the prisoner community inside the walls as well, because what it means is lots of people are dispersed and are not in the right place or at the right time.
So if there's not extra spaces, I mean, are we having to kind of keep people in police cells until there's a one in, one out policy? Are we having to release people that would be released anyway? Are we releasing people early? I mean, how is this practically functioning on the ground?
Well, there's a few bits to unpick there. So it is one in, one out at the moment in particular areas. So the areas that are particularly affected by this are the sort of the northeast, Yorkshire, Cumbria, Lancashire, Manchester, Merseyside, Cheshire. We're in regular contact with governors around the country. So, for instance, the governor of Lewis, down on the coast, he's operating with spaces in his prison. So it's definitely a sort of Midlands up issue, and it's one in, one out. In terms of releasing people, we've been working in an environment where we've been releasing people early, but we're moving to SDS 40. So, in September, prisoners will be released at that 40% point with a decent plan. But September seems quite a long way away still at the moment.
So sorry, when you say 40%, does that mean 40% of their term served?
Yes, correct. So that's a government change. They're actually changing. That's through the House at the moment. That takes effect, I think, 10th of September. And so prisoners will start to be released. But prisons are already preparing for that and have already been through the entire prison system looking for those that will be released, which we think will generate a few thousand spaces in September. So that's what they're trying to get to. They're trying to get to September with more
So
short-term
I'm trying to
measures.
do my mental maths here, because that means there is a little bit of a lag. So if there is going to be sort of people released even earlier from September, we've had 470 rioters charged. We know that there was over 1,000 people arrested. If we're looking at, more to be charged than have already been, the next 2-3 weeks, that's going to be the kind of the sticky period, isn't it?
Absolutely, really sticky. And the population management team in prison service headquarters, of which some of our members work in, are doing a fantastic job on a daily basis, sort of moving people around as best they can, trying to move prisoners from one prison to another to generate space. So moving prisoners from reception prisons into sort of long-term high security prisons to generate space so they can receive from the courts. They're working incredibly hard and working incredibly long hours at the moment, just trying to keep the system functioning.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for taking the time to come on our programme and explain all of that to us. Mark Ike there, who's the Vice President of the Prison Governors Association.
Vanessa Frake is a former prison governor, and she's the author of The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
Thanks so much for coming on. Tell us what you think about these emergency measures. I mean, they're basically a sticking plaster masking the need for fundamental reform.
Well, I think as Nick Hardwick sort of said, our prison service is like a filling bath, and every time it gets to the top, it starts overflowing. We're in this position because nobody listens. None of the previous governments listened about the threat of overcrowding and what it actually means. And and now we're having to, because of the recent disturbances and riots, that we're now having to implement Operation Early Dawn, which basically will mean that prisoners who are either applying for bail, going to a magistrate's court, will have to wait until there's a prison bed available should they be remanded in custody. So it's not ideal, and it costs the police a lot of money, around about £300 per prisoner per night, to keep them in police cells, because they've got to have doctors on call, they've got to be fed, they've got to be clothed, they've got to be staffed. So it's not ideal at all. But we are where we are. The government's between a rock and a hard place, to be honest with you. There's really no kind of end in sight. They've managed to free up around about 500 beds, one wing at HMP Stocken, and bringing back online HMP Cookham Wood that was closed in March, unfit for habitation. So, and I think that they're also fast tracking a load of cells that have been put out of order for one reason or another, to try and make some spaces. But it's basically robbing Peter to pay Paul all the time.
I mean, you must have come across your fair share of senior civil servants and indeed ministers in your time as a prison governor. I mean, the frank point is nobody is interested in prisons politically because there are no votes in it.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head. People think that once prisoners are behind that wall, they're not interested, they forget that there is a whole sort of community behind that wall that has to be dealt with, and eventually some of that community are going to come back into society. We lock up probably the most prisoners in Western Europe. We have the worst reoffending rates in Western Europe. So that in itself sort of says something. I am hopeful that with the appointment of James Timpson, who has worked in prisons with prisoners, ex-prisoners, for quite a while, and actually knows something about prisons, that eventually, once we've got over this crisis, that things will change. But I'm not holding my breath as yet.
No, I wouldn't do that if I were you, Vanessa. Anyway, that's Vanessa Frake, former prison governor. In fact, she worked at places like Wormwood Scrubs and Holloway, and received an MBE for her work in the prison service. Coming on to talk about the prison overcrowding crisis. And you can get her book, The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons, wherever you get your good books from.